Picture a child. He is 6 years old. He wakes up before sunrise, but not for school or breakfast. He wakes up to rehearse. This is Gary, Indiana, in the 1960s, a steel town where the air carries the heavy scent of smoke, and the winters are famously brutal. In this environment, families of 9 lived in houses so small that parents and children shared the same cramped footprint, while fathers returned from the mills physically exhausted. The public knows the moonwalk, the hit records, and the global history, but these milestones sit on top of a private experience that began in a small living room years before the world learned his name. To understand the performer, we have to look at the daily reality of his youth and the specific things that were taken from Michael Jackson while the whole world cheered. At 2300 Jackson Street, 9 people shared a 2-bedroom house. The walls were thin enough to hear everything, and the boys shared beds in a space that offered no privacy. Katherine Jackson was the emotional foundation of the home. A quiet, religious woman, she filled the small house with music and a warmth her children would later credit for their resilience. Joseph Jackson brought a different energy. He was a former guitarist for a band called the Falcons, and he watched his own musical ambitions fail to materialize. When Joseph looked at his sons, he saw a financial escape route from the steel mills. He recognized a way to reclaim the life his own dreams had never provided. After Tito accidentally broke a string on his father's guitar, Joseph's response was a physical beating. That same night, Joseph fixed the string and forced the boy to play. He decided that if his children were going to touch the instruments, they were going to master them. The children lived in a household where physical discipline and a total belief in their talent occupied the same space. Rehearsals followed a relentless schedule. Joseph would return from the steel mill and immediately drill the boys through their routines, correcting the stakes with physical force. Michael spent those early years on the sidelines, watching his brothers. He absorbed complex choreography from the shadows before he was ever asked to join. When he eventually joined the group, he was instantly more capable than his brothers. This talent made him the most visible to his father. Being the best meant carrying the most weight. Joseph focused his most intense demands on the child who showed the most promise. The rise of the Jackson 5 took these private living room rehearsals and turned them into a public performance. When the group signed with Motown, the family's local success was absorbed by a high-output corporate machine. This chart shows the distribution of the wealth created. While the boys generated massive revenue for the label, their individual profit share was microscopic. Michael carried the economic weight of this entire enterprise on his shoulders, despite receiving only a tiny fraction of the earnings. By the time he reached global fame, the boy had been fully re-engineered into a high-yield financial asset. In his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalk, Michael Jackson provided an honest look back at the origins of his career. He described a recurring nightmare from his youth, the image of his father's face appearing suddenly in his bedroom window while he tried to sleep. Michael lived with the realization that the source of his deepest fear and the architect of his greatest success were the same person. This creates a difficult paradox. Without the fear Joseph instilled, the music and the legacy simply would not exist. Joseph Jackson built one of the most successful careers in history, but he purchased it with his son's childhood, a trade Michael Jackson spent the rest of his life trying to survive. In 1966, the Jackson 5 began performing locally in Gary, Indiana. Michael was 8 years old. The boys traveled in a van with their father driving through the Midwest, performing in clubs, talent shows, and theaters, wherever anyone would have them. Michael later described these years as both magical and exhausting. He loved the music and his brothers, but the schedule was relentless. He spent those hours watching other children from the window of the van. He watched them playing in the streets, doing nothing in particular. At 8 years old, Michael was already living a life that followed a script written by others, a life he hadn't chosen for himself. The children he saw were existing in the loose, unscheduled way that children are supposed to exist. They had no purpose and no audience. Seeing that freedom from the window created a longing in him that he couldn't quite name at the time. While those children were free to simply be, Michael's daily reality was highly structured and entirely performance-driven. These foundational years were spent behind barriers, the glass of a van window, the edge of a stage, or a demanding rehearsal schedule. Before the massive weight of global fame arrived, there was a quieter loss, the theft of his right to simply exist as a child. In 1969, the Jackson 5 signed to Motown Records, and the family moved to Los Angeles. Motown was more than a record label. It was a factory of talent. Berry Gordy had built a machine that could turn gifted young people into international superstars. But it was also a business, and businesses don't raise children. They use assets. Michael was the most extraordinary asset the label had ever seen. The first 4 singles the group released all went to #1. It was a streak that hadn't happened before in the history of the label, not even with the Supremes or Marvin Gaye. Motown gave Michael the world, but it took his agency. He sang what he was told to sing and performed when the schedule demanded it. By age 11, Michael was the most famous child on the planet. Little girls screamed his name from behind police barricades, while his voice was on every radio. The economic reality was lopsided. His voice was funding an empire, generating a towering column of royalties and revenue. None of that money sat in an account belonging to Michael. He received a standard allowance, while his work generated millions for the corporation. While running at the pace of a global company, he missed every normal milestone. He never had a birthday party with friends his own age, and he never went to a school dance. He never had the experience of being anonymous. Walking into a room as nobody in particular is a basic human necessity for developing a sense of self that belongs to you. Because his formative years were dictated by the needs of a billion-dollar machine, he was denied the environment needed to develop an identity outside of his performance. In 1993, Michael Jackson sat down for an interview with Oprah Winfrey that was watched by 90 million people. In that interview, he said it simply, "I had no childhood." He spoke the words without drama, then looked at his hands and went quiet. He described crying in the mirror as a teenager because he hated what he saw. The intense scrutiny of global fame had arrived while his sense of self was still forming. The weight of that performance left him uncertain about who he actually was beneath the persona the world knew. As an adult, Michael once bought out a toy store alone after closing. He walked through the aisles at night and bought everything he wanted. He was finally entering the store that the 8-year-old boy in the van had only ever seen from a distance. He built Neverland Ranch to give other children the magical experience he never had, speaking with the sincerity of someone who meant every word. Grown men don't buy out toy stores for the love of toys. They do it because they are searching for the version of themselves that never got to exist. The impact of Michael Jackson's life is visible in the quiet, lifelong ache of a man who kept trying to go back to a childhood that was never fully his to begin with.
He was just 12 years old. When you go back and watch that historic footage, he stands right at the front of the stage, moving with this unbelievable precision and presence. I mean, his charisma is just so overwhelming that it makes the audience momentarily forget that despite the adult-level mastery they're witnessing, they are literally watching a 12-year-old boy. Now, this flawless performance wasn't just spontaneous magic. It was the heavy result of a conscious life spent entirely on learning exactly how to make a room feel something. Just think about the sheer weight of this for a second. Every single hour of rehearsal, every harsh correction from his father, every waking moment spent watching, absorbing, and practicing, it all accumulated into that one solid, undeniable foundation. And there's this really devastating contrast between what the public saw and what was actually happening underneath. On one side, you have what he gave the world, right? His voice, his movement, his genius, his energy, his very soul. But on the other side, what it cost. It cost the child inside the icon. It cost the boy who simply wanted to play. It was an intimate, deeply hidden loss that, frankly, the rest of the world never even thought to ask about. Which brings us to section 1, the hidden reality, a system's blind eye. We kind of need to zoom out for a second and look at the macro level enablers here, because while the general public might not have known what was going on offstage, the people behind the curtain absolutely did. The career we celebrate was built on a foundation that cost a child something irreplaceable. While most of the world was just busy enjoying the extraordinary music, the industry knew. The people immediately around him knew. The system clearly saw the cost, but the system just kept going anyway. Because, well, the system is designed to continue. So why did the machine keep running? Honestly, it's simple. The music was just too good. The money was way too massive to ignore. And the fame was too incredibly powerful. The industry machine was so overwhelmingly successful that it literally blinded and paralyzed anyone who might have otherwise naturally intervened. Because of all that money and fame, wait was the one word no one in the system was willing to say. Think about that. No one was willing to stop the machine, look at the reality of the situation and say, wait, this child needs something the stage cannot give him. And that leads us right into section 2, a lifelong compensation. Neverland. You see, when you have a foundational lack of protection and normalcy during your youth, that doesn't just magically disappear the second you turn 18. It results in a lifelong, often desperate aftermath. For decades, the media painted the toys, the amusement park rides, and the friendships with children as these bizarre eccentricities. But when you reframe it through the lens of what we've just discussed, it takes on a completely different shape. It becomes this desperate, almost tragic attempt to reclaim what was missing from the very beginning. His obsessive desire to be around innocence really stemmed from the fact that innocence was the one thing his own life had never protected. It's a profound tragedy. He gave the world absolutely everything he had, and in return, the world essentially handed him a mirror and simply demanded that he keep performing. So the real lesson here isn't just about one demanding father in Gary, Indiana, or one greedy record label out in Los Angeles. It's about a massive, self-perpetuating system. It's exactly what happens when an industry encounters a talent so extraordinary, so generational, that it entirely forgets the talent belongs to a human being first. The industry literally inverted the natural order of a person's worth. At the very top, their absolute priority was the performer. Second, maybe the child, and way down at the very bottom, almost as an afterthought, was the human being. They completely flipped what it means to care for a person.
Let's move on to our final part, section 3, the true price of genius.
Up until now, we've been looking at the industry and the people directly around him. But now we really need to turn the camera around and evaluate our own role as the consumers of this remarkable art. What do we ask of the people whose gifts we consume without question? When we stream the songs, when we watch the flawless choreography, what are we implicitly demanding? We are the ones feeding the machine. What does our insatiable consumption require of the fragile humans inside the fame? We so often call Michael Jackson the greatest entertainer who ever lived. And most people mean that as the ultimate, highest compliment. And sure, it is. But it is also the most expensive sentence anyone ever said about a little boy from Gary, Indiana, who just wanted to play. The title of greatest entertainer is simultaneously his crowning achievement and his most profound tragedy.
So what do you take away from all this? If this explainer moved you, the true tribute isn't just replaying the performances or trying to mimic the moonwalk, it's hearing his music differently, with the full weight of its cost. It's questioning what we as a society demand of genius. Most importantly, it's taking the time to understand the full, complex story of the human person who gave those gifts to us, who really paid the ultimate price for brilliance. That's the question I want to leave you with today.